Welcome. My name is Onkar Kular, and together with my colleague Christina Zetterlund, we have had the honour and the kind of absolute pleasure of being the curators for this year's Luleå Biennial. And today is the kind of final weekend, and we wanted to kind of really try to think about a way of kind of making a form of closure, which is a kind of semi-closure really, and not a full closure, in terms of trying to really connect with some of the themes that we've been thinking about, some of the actual kind of structures that we've been also kind of trying to build in within the biennial, but also kind of really importantly try to invite back some of the people that we've been working with, collaborating with, and also kind of connecting to some of the organisations that have been kind of happily and kind of wonderfully supporting our work in the biennial, and that is kind of really key and important aspects that we also want to kind of foreground, that the biennial has really been a kind of collective endeavour, and it's really been something that's kind of been co-produced and kind of thought in common and in community. So the biennial this year, there's welcome, is an introduction of craft into the, which is essentially a kind of historically an art biennial. Of course, it has a kind of longer history that we've also been dealing with in terms of a biennial that also appeared in the summer and the winter, and therefore kind of performed in relationship to the seasons. But in this year, it's been really to try to think about, okay, well, how do we bring in craft into an art biennial? And from the onset, both Christina and myself have been really trying to kind of push this idea of a broader notion of craft, to try to think about craft in its kind of tight, marginalised ways, or boxed into certain kind of frameworks, but to think of it in really a kind of like a broader framework. And that's really then trying to situate craft in relationship to things like food craft, weaving, car modifications, wood carving, straw craft, and even jewellery. And to start off with, when we were asked to work on the biennial, one of the things that we were very keen on thinking about was not to try to kind of impose an initial framework to think about the biennial through. Of course, there was the introduction of craft, but we were also keen not to, as we both are not from Norrbotten, to impose a theme or a framework to kind of think about the biennial through. And so one of the things that we started to think about really then was to say, okay, well, how do we start to create a framework for not imposing a theme, but actually trying to work in common? And so we started to think about this idea of listening and learning. And could we listen and learn with Norrbotten? And so there was no overarching theme. To actually do it with Norrbotten and then try to think really how we would do that, as we've said here, listening widely, again trying to cut across certain kind of boundaries and kind of borders that we were interested in thinking of moving across. And then allowing that listening and learning to allow for kind of questions of concern to emerge from that. So kind of not necessarily a theme, but certain kind of threads and questions which would allow us to put them into kind of common again, to kind of think about these questions together. And to do that, with listening and learning, we developed a series of kind of principles, and again, there were principles that were to be shared with our collaborators, with people that we wanted to be in conversation with. And we developed kind of 4 connecting principles. The first one was beyond border thinking. So again, trying to think beyond kind of established boundaries of what might be craft and art, but what also might be handicraft and slöjd, etc. And then also thinking of beyond, also kind of physical borders, really trying to recognise the region as this kind of region that also not necessarily has a kind of direct relationship between the north and south, but very much a kind of east and west. And then the second principle was decentering, which was to generate dialogues with places and people on their own terms, and to try to avoid things through kind of premeditated hierarchies or value standards. And here really thinking carefully to learn, and again, not to kind of impose And so really also thinking about our roles within the process of producing the biennial. And then the third one was this idea of custodianship. So really looking at the biennial as something that is an ecology, and it's an ecology in many different ways. So it's an intellectual ecology, it's something that we think through and think with, but at the same time it is also a physical resource, you know, so that people work within there, but also there are kind of material productions within that. So really thinking about the biennial in terms of its kind of long-term objectives and what we do within that and what we leave behind. And then the final principle that we were sharing was something called Earth Imagination, and the title of today's event. So thinking really about imagination as a kind of collective endeavour, and something that actually can come from sight, place, but again thinking kind of about something that happens collectively. So to kind of shift imagination from an individual activity to a kind of collective activity, and then what types of formats or frameworks do we create to allow that to happen within the context of the biennial. And again here, one of the things that we were thinking about is, okay, we want to work in a very situated way, but how do we address some of the kind of global issues that are also impacting the region and the people and the lives of people here. And through that kind of initial work, so while I was saying that this overarching theme didn't necessarily appear, but these kind of threads, we called them. And these threads were opportunities to kind of weave things together, to kind of collect things in balls, to kind of situate and unravel things as what we call kind of emerging threads. And this has also allowed us to kind of formulate how we've worked with the exhibitions, how we've kind of curated some of the kind of platforms that we've been working with. And the first was ice and snow. So again, the kind of climate change here is a material reality. It's what we see in a kind of day-to-day life in terms of what's happening to the environment here, but you see it as a material reality. So here we were thinking really that, okay, how could you look at ice as kind of compelling earth evidence for climate change? And if you kind of zoom into the material, how might you kind of zoom out of that? And then what types of works could you engage with in relationship to that? And then the next thread was, again, looking at extractivism and the kind of history of kind of circular extractivism within the region. So how these patterns are kind of emerging and keep kind of reappearing in kind of circular ways. And then the final thread was crafting beyond wastelands. So looking at kind of counter-narratives and counter-practices against the depiction of this region as a kind of wasteland, as something that can be kind of tapped into as a kind of resource primarily. And so listening has also asked questions of the biennial format and how it should act, thinking creatively about how to stretch the biennial as a space for showing and acting. So here kind of recognizing that just thinking about the biennial as a series of exhibitions is fundamentally not enough. So we were really trying to think, okay, how do we use the exhibitions but kind of build on those with kind of additional formats and frameworks to kind of think through and kind of act through. So we developed then 3 formats. One was the exhibitions, the first one was the festival, and the learning room. So the learning room, exhibitions. And the festival was something that we kind of kicked off the biennial with. Initially it started off as a kind of weekend activity, but again it was an opportunity to form kind of collaborations and to kind of go to locations that necessarily might not necessarily kind of fit within the kind of immediate geography of the biennial exhibition sites, and then to try to create collaborations in situ, where it actually made a difference for certain types of organisations and certain types of practices. And so, and also to kind of, as we've said, decentralise the normal operations of the biennial, which is predominantly also sometimes kind of fixed to these kind of spaces and exhibition sites. And so within So in the opening weekend, we had an organ concert at in Jukkasjärvi, the parish there, and we did a number of kind of invitations to other organisations to kind of co-curate exhibitions together. We did an exhibition at the New Kiruna Art Library, with the Kiruna Commune collection. And these are kind of series of paintings from him. And then the next platform was the Learning Room. And the Learning Room was, again, an opportunity to kind of really recognise the kind of expansive geography of this region, and how might you kind of create a biennial that might also think about creating these kind of really established kind of connections and try to bridge different ways of bringing in knowledge that might not necessarily require a kind of building of a whole exhibition around it. So we're really thinking about a kind of physical and virtual space, a virtual digital space, and a format. So recognise the expensive geography. A format for sharing, a hybrid space, so both physical like we are today and virtual. And so we've run a number of events throughout the biennial through this kind of learning room platform. And again, really thinking about different ways of kind of sharing knowledge and producing knowledge in community. And as a part of the learning room program, we've been commissioning a series of films. And again, that is, I'm working with Carl Oscar, our digital producer, to produce a number of films. Again, thinking about the film format and the production of film to allow you to kind of create different forms of exhibition making. And then sharing knowledge from different perspectives. And one of the key things with the learning room is to kind of try to establish a format that can be also kind of like a prototype for kind of future activities. So thinking about the learning room both as also kind of like a digital infrastructure that we can then continue to kind of work with and continue to kind of build knowledge through. And with that comes, working with a digital platform also comes with different types of kind of practices that we are kind of working together with. And then there were the exhibitions, and here exhibition making also as a kind of form of listening. So kind of really thinking about how do we use the exhibition as a resource to think firstly around these kind of emerging threads that we're talking about, but also to kind of support practitioners that might also be thinking about these kind of ideas or questions, and using the exhibition as a kind of as a resource to kind of develop projects or continue developing research and projects in relationship with artists and organisations. And so there were opportunity to weave together the questions, and thinking really again also about these kind of notions of flows and circulations. So trying not to have individual exhibition sites dealing with singular threads, but actually trying to think about all the exhibition sites as a kind of one larger ecology. And so we've had exhibitions here at Havre Magazinet, again trying to also connect the exhibitions with the sites predominantly, so thinking about Havre Magazinet's history in relationship to a building for storing oats for the military horses, but also its connection to Buden and all the development work that's happening here in relationship to the green energy future. And at Norrbotten's museum, we worked very carefully with their existing activities. So we have done a collaboration with one of their research projects they're working on called GLASS, which is glacial archaeology in Sapfi. And in Luleå Konsthall, we've tried to kind of really think about the works there in relationship to the river and the site there. So we have a number of works that also kind of connect very directly to the river, but also have some sort of kind of interaction with the river and its kind of history. And this is a work at the Pontus Bardet, which is also, again, looking back at this kind of notion of custodianship. We've been looking back at the biennial, and it started as a kind of winter biennial that also worked with snow and ice sculpting. So we've shown a work there from 2004, which was originally commissioned for the Luleå Biennial then. And then in Gallery Sister, we've kind of worked with their theme, which is this year's theme, which is kind of friendship. And we've used the Sister as a kind of as an opportunity to kind of gather works through that have been appearing throughout the biennial into one space. So it's a kind of alternative kind of geography of the biennial. And now I'm going to hand over to Christina.
Yeah, thank you. And it's just very nice to see all of you here today. And what I will very briefly talk, I will introduce the program, but I will just very briefly talk about a couple of projects of listening and learning that has been that we have been working with in the biennial. And this is one of them, which is a project made by the weaver Doris Wiklund. And she herself is, she's today 95 years old. She came to the opening, which was really amazing. And she worked for many years as a weaving teacher in Kiruna. And during that, when she was a teacher, her students started to bring her traditional weaves from their different villages. I mean, it could just be small fragments. And then she started to realize that this was a history that had not been written. So from these kind of small fragments, she started to make a more systematic collection. And then she actually did write the history of the traditional weaves from Norrbotten. And she did that. She created an archive. She published a book, and this book is from 1993. So there is a history that, and she is the first one that writes the history, and it's 1993, which of course you can ask, why is that so late? And then she, what is also interesting with that book, and also with the aspect of learning, but also that the tradition shouldn't stop. It's not a tradition, it's not an image of a tradition, but it's so in the book there's weaving notes for others to continue. But there's also narrations about the weavers. So it's also an image of lives in Norrbotten. And also, and this, what we show here, and this is at the Luleå Konsthall, is boards that she had in an exhibition that she made, again in order to learn about this project. And she has this really nice bag that she made, that she had, so she was traveling around with this exhibition to different events and venues in order to talk about this history. You can take the next image. Another project that we're showing is also about, is also partly deals with this absence of histories. And this is Erika Nordvall Falk. And she is a knitter and an ethnologist, and she has for almost 5 decades been collecting mittens, mitten patterns, mitten histories, mitten, and again, it's a history about patterns, it's a history about knitting, it's a history, but also about the practices, about the circulations, why did a certain color become important then and there? So it's a history about a practice, but also there's about a history about a region. And she has, she has many ways of sharing this history. And one thing that she does is these kind of small leaflets with the patterns, so you can histories and patterns so you can knit the different mittens. And then, of course, as you can see here, it's an image of the knitter that started to use this pattern on why. And of course, you can see it's an image of it's an image that for me really talks about how it's a history that no one has been talking about. And I think both of them is quite a good example of this crafting burned wastelands. Yeah, we can put it out so you can look at it. And you can take the next image. And this is an image that is from a workshop that we did at the opening weekend with Anna-Stina Svacko, where she invited us to gather around Sami stitches. And this was a workshop where she started to talk about her own family history and the craft that was in her own family stitches, her own family history. And then she invited us to stitch, to make some of the stitches that was in her family. So we made these kind of small brooches. And why I wanted to show this image is, I think of course it was a nice workshop, but what it also was, it was a other way of getting to know the Duji. It was very clear that that craft was not just something that we were looking at, but it was also something how we learned that history through making together with Anna-Stina. And I think that that is also an important aspect. And we will do that today as well. You will be able to listen to some of the participants and some of our collaborators in the biennial, and the practices that we will listen to also has this aspect of learning and practices. So I can start to and we do this day together with Urgent Pedagogics. And Urgent Pedagogics is initiated and organized by Jaspers, and Magnus Eriksson, that sits here in the front, is the initiator of Urgent Pedagogics. And it's a very interesting platform that starts in the idea that learning and pedagogic as crucial to socially engage critical practices. And that is that listening and learning is not just something in the margin that we do the artwork and then we listen and learn, but it's rather that is part of the practice. And in that platform, I would really recommend you to go into the webpage to look at its practices from all over the world, and many different. It's quite diverse practices. But today, we will start by listening to Astrid Fadnes and Susanne Norman from the Søstrene Suse collective. And they will talk about their work with the audio cinema format. And at Konsthallen, you can listen to the episode Let the Mountains Live. That is an episode that is part of a larger project within this audio cinema that is called Following in Elsa Laula's Footstep Through Sápmi, 100 Years of Fighting for Sami Rights. And after that, we will have the great pleasure to listen to two presentations that invites us to new ways of inviting to weaving, and it's Linnea and Ida that are here that will present. And what was interesting when when we think about this, that we have these two workshops, is that in the opening weekend that was one of the participants in the opening weekend that came up to me, and she said, we were standing at Doris, and Doris was there, and it was the happiness of her project. And then she said that, yeah, but it's such a shame that there is so few that is interested in weaving today, that wants to continue this tradition, which was something that was radically altered by Ida and Linnea's workshop, because it has 50 places, and in 1.5 days after we published it, it was full. And I was hoping to join, but I was too late. So I think that is also interesting, because it is about how we invite and who can participate. And I think that also that huge interest is also about how you did the invitation and how the format was made, which some really interesting to listen to you. And also this other form of invitation is also part of Rosa Tolnov Clausen, that did in collaboration with Haparanda City Culture Department and Aina Art Museum, invited to her format that is called Weaving Kiosk at the Rajala at the borders in Tornio. And she would talk about the format and also how that developed in Tornio. And then we will have lunch. You will be able to buy lunch from here at the kiosk, and also during the lunch you can visit the exhibitions, of course. And after lunch, there will be 2 workshops. And the first one is with Katarina Spikskull. And you see part of her project here that we show in Konsthalle, where she works with researches reindeer skin, which is also what the workshop is about. But I would also like to highlight her again about this, about practitioners that is, have a wide range of practices. And this is a book that she just published together with Anna Westman Kummunen that comes out of the IDA project, Arctic Indigenous Design Archive project. It is a learning with the IDA archives for youth. So it's a book about the histories of the makers, but also about how you, through different forms of craft, can work and learn with archives. So I will also put this here so you can have a look at it. And then you see the table here, the wonderful table that really, with the baskets and the spoons, which is from Eva Gunnares' workshop. And Eva's workshop will be in English and Katarina's will be in Swedish, where we will learn about land and food. And you have to sign up for the workshops. And before we started, there was 1 spot left of the 12 places for Katarina's workshop. And there was 5 spots left for Eva's workshop. And then we will end the day with 2 talks. One by Silje Figgensjö, and here you see her works in the exhibition, where she will talk about her works, but also about her methods. And we end the day with a different form of learning, which is Maja Sialuk, that does both research, but also practice traditional Inuit tradition, Inuit tattoo.
But I think we would now will start with our first presentation.
Yes. Which is Astrid Fatnes and Susanne Norman from the Søstrene Suse collective. And the collective also consists of Ingrid Fatnes, Eva Maria Fjellheim, and they have collaborated on various projects in South America, in Norway and Sápmi, in which they have addressed issues like feminism, extractivism, and the autonomy and territorial struggles of indigenous people. So, and they are going to join us online. So we'll see if we... Thank you. Yes, and here we have it.
Thank you so much. My name is Astrid Fadnes, and by my side, or maybe above me, or somewhere on the screen, is my co-presentator, Susanne. Maybe you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Yes, so this is Susanne Norman, and my name is Astrid Fadnes, and we are a part of the radio collective and the radio project collective Søstrene Suse. And first of all, just want to say thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this seminar, and not least to be part also of the exhibition with one of the episodes that is part of the radio project that we are now to present and elaborate a bit more on. And just to start, we also want to introduce the 2 other members of the collective who are not present here today. Eva Maria Fjellheim, who is a PhD candidate at the University in Tromsø and also part of the Sami Council, and Ingrid Fadnes, who is a journalist. So we're a collective of 4 people who are connected both through this project, but also many years previously through personal relations and through work we have done in Latin America and as part of a solidarity committee with Latin America, and also working with indigenous rights, something that has also led us into this project. And I'm going to share a presentation now. Can you all see the presentation?
Yes, yeah.
Very good. So the radio project's name is In Elsa Laula's Footsteps Through Sápmi, 100 Years of Sami Struggle for Rights. And we're going to present a little bit about the background for the work, also elaborate a bit on the one episode that is part of the Luleå Biennial, and also not least share about our experience working with this format or concept called radio cinema, or radio bio, and also hopefully have time in the end for some questions and comments. This picture that you see is a quite important starting point for this project. This picture shows the first Sami national meeting that took place in Tromsø in Trondheim back in 1917. And in 2017, there was held a 100 years anniversary for this first Sami national meeting, also in Tromsø in Trondheim. And on this anniversary celebration, one person was particularly brought light on. That was Elsa Laula Renberg, who was one of the initiators of this meeting back in 1917, but also one of the very active, one of those who took very active part, not only in the meeting, but also in general as a political and organizational worker and a writer for promoting Sami rights at that time. And so today she's more known than she was before this anniversary, and she is also today recognized as you could say a Sami political and even a feminist icon. But one important thing, and this of course was inspiring for this radio project, and also we are bringing her name directly in the title of the project. But one very important realization that we did and that brought us into this project were also the fact that Elsa Laula Renberg at that time in 1917, she was not very unique of being a female political activist. If you take a closer look at the picture, you will actually see that almost half of the people present at this meeting are women. And this is quite extraordinary for being back in that early. And we have not found any photos to compare it with if you look at other national meetings at the same time. And so this also brought us to the curiosity to explore how this fact of having so many female political leaders in the Sami community, how this has affected the Sami community, political struggle, culture, language, up to today. And this led us onto a journey where we traveled, the four of us traveled through parts of Sápmi, mainly through the Norwegian parts of Sápmi, but also parts of the Finnish and Swedish parts of Sápmi. And one important note is that Eva Maria Fjellheim, you can see the four of us on the lower right picture. Eva Maria Fjellheim is Southern Sami herself. The three others of us, we are non-Sami, and she was a very important door opener for us to enter these spaces and to meet and get to know these people whom we also interviewed. 23 women in total we conducted interviewed with. You can see on this picture also Inga Karlsson on the lower right photo and upper right photo, who is a long or whole life activist and promoter of Sami rights in Tysfjord, and also Petra Laiti on the upper left corner, who is working for the fishing rights in the Dietno River. So it was a great variation in different kind of people or women we interviewed from different fields, working within culture, art, with language, political fights, working against extractivism and the resource fight in Sápmi. And these 23 interviews we edited, and the kind of one of the outcome was these 4 episodes making out the whole documentary project. One of them, which has been part of the Luleå Biennale by Värde Orrot, Let the Mountains Live. Susanne will very soon elaborate a bit on. The 3 other episodes that are also available online for listening is 400 reindeer skulls, 400 bullet holes, which follows the artist Marit Annesara and her fight to support her brother, who has been in a court case against the Norwegian state, which has put on an enforced reduction of his reindeer herd. One other is called Delvia. It's more focus on younger voices, speaking about the struggle for protecting but also developing language, culture, tradition, and knowledge. And then the 4th one, Et bilde kan forandre, a picture can make a change, where Eva Maria Fjellheim, who is also the voice in this radio documentary, she tells about a picture that she found of her grandmother, and this photo becomes a starting point for a travel in Norway's and Sweden's racial biology in some areas. And then I leave the word to you, Susanne, to elaborate a bit on this episode.
Okay, thank you so much, Astrid, for your introduction. Well, this episode that perhaps some of you listeners have had the possibility to listen to already is called Let the Mountains Live by Värde Orrot, a title that makes the exercise of historical memory, remembering the struggle for the Alta River a little over 40 years ago. Let the river live. So the name of the episode makes explicit the connection between the struggles for land and territory and how it has never ended. And the episode starts with Asta Balto, Sami intellectual pioneer, who was also participating in the historical struggle for the Alta River a little over 40 years ago, making the mention that Sami struggles have made many advances in terms of political rights, but the right to land and territory is the most difficult one. So this episode we visit 3 Sami women from 3 generations who have struggled for the right to land and territories. One of them is Asta Balto. We meet her in her house in the summer of 2017, and we meet Ella Marie Isaksen, who at the time, and probably still, is a part of the environmental organization Nature and Youth, and who is a Sami artist herself. And she discusses also the case of the copper mine that was to be established in Repparfjorden up north on the Norwegian side of the border in Sápmi, that would land grab large reindeer herding areas, but it would also pollute a lake, allowing for the unification of environmentalists and Sami reindeer herders to defend the area. And they had last year, wasn't it? Or was it 2020? Well, they have until now actually won the case. So it's a very positive example of a huge articulation, a camp that lasted for months and months, and that have had a positive result. We also meet Unni Fjellheim, a southern Sami reindeer herder, who has defended her the landscapes the reindeer herd needs to survive, confronted by wind energy development. And the photo you can see of the episode is from one of the moments during that struggle, where a protest camp received visits from Guatemalan and Colombian young people from indigenous communities who made a ceremony on the southern Sami lands and talked about how they see their struggles for land and territory similar to those occurring here in Sápmi, and to reflect a bit on what has happened, because we did the interviews in 2017, so well, 5 years is not a lot, or 6 years, almost 6 years. It's not a lot in the long array of things, but still some changes we can perhaps observe. We were talking about this with Astrid a couple of days ago when we were discussing this presentation, that we have had advances in terms of how we talk about these issues. We were remembering when we were doing the narrative of this episode, and we were discussing what concepts to use, and we were sure that we wanted these episodes to be, well, for us, the whole process was a learning by doing, and it was a kind of decolonial learning exercise. Doing these interviews, questioning ourselves and our own position in society, and then trying to broadcast this, to communicate this in a way, right? And we wanted to be careful that the concepts that we would use were not too difficult for people not already knowing a lot about these struggles. We know that as we have also been and still are in many senses, there are much structural ignorance in Norwegian majority society. So we wanted to take, let's say, to not use too complicated concepts, right? But what we have seen in these 6 years is that the way we talk about these struggles have changed. The concept of green colonialism that was introduced by Aili Keskitalo in 2013 is now a concept that much more people have awareness of what it means. There is now an awareness of how, for instance, climate change mitigation might actually increase the pressure on the indigenous lands and territories. Many people talk about the double burden of climate change. Climate change lived as the changes in weather patterns, putting a great pressure on livelihoods of indigenous communities and also other rural communities around the globe. But then the climate change mitigation comes and might even make things worse. And below the discourse of the urgent need of saving the humanity, protesting has even become more difficult. But we see that the society talks about this in a perhaps different way now, but this hasn't stopped the projects. There are an increasing amount of projects called green in Norway. We talk about wind power, the minerals that we also need for the green transition model that is hegemonic. And a case of interest, or not a case of interest, but the alarm or the seriousness of this is illustrated by the sentence from last year in Norway. Perhaps some of you have heard the Fosen case, the largest onshore wind energy development project in Europe on Sami lands, parts of it. And last year, the Supreme Court of Norway sentenced the project for illegitimate. The turbines are there illegitimately. However, the Oil and Energy Department has not done any steps to take them away, to undo the harm. And now we are in a kind of limbo process in Norway, where a new complex processes of generating even more knowledge, even though the knowledge bases were evaluated very carefully in the court system already, putting the reindeer herders in a limbo when they are uncertain if they can continue as reindeer herders in the area. So we have the Øyfjellet case, which will go into the court system now in May. We have several mine sites, and I know that on the Swedish side of the border you also have a lot of these projects, also the wind energy development with Norwegian investments that has created a huge burden on several Sami herding communities on the Swedish side of the border. So this episode is about these issues, and maybe I talk too much. Astrid, I will leave you the word again. Yeah.
Thank you, Susanna. We just want to, in this last part of the presentation, elaborate a little bit on the concept of radiobio or radio cinema that maybe some of you got a chance to experience as part of in the exhibition space in Luleå. Actually, this idea of presenting this project as a radio cinema appeared when shortly after we finalized the radio documentary, we were invited to the film festival Human in Oslo to present the radio project. And then we were we had not really heard about this concept of radio cinema before, but this was a starting point for us to explore this. And we discovered that at least in Sweden, it was already quite established as a concept where people gathered in a cinema space and listened to podcasts together, followed by a discussion and reflection afterwards. So this has actually this very simple concept of just coming together, listening together, and to not have like the word cinema kind of loses its meaning when it doesn't have pictures to see, but in fact we say that through the radio cinema you don't have the pictures screened and for your eyes to see, but rather they are created in our heads. And we discovered how this radio cinema was a very suitable format to present this project, and not least because it is a very flexible and simple concept. All you need is basically some good speakers and a space to meet, and you can be 2 people or you can be 200 people. And this also has become a catalyst for conversation. So the conversations and the talks you can listen to in the radio documentary leads to new conversations in the reflection that very often we have experienced follows the co-listening experience. So we have taken the radio documentary to a wide range of different spaces. We've been in conference spaces, in classrooms, at cafes, at the chapel, in an outdoor huge cave at the festival. We've been to demonstrations, exhibition spaces, seminars, and also with a few of the episodes we have also translated and added subtitles to both Spanish and English, so that we've also been able to use it in once it was shown at the women conference in Chiapas in Mexico, but also part of this schooling program within the organization we're active in, and the Solidarity Committee with Latin America. And this has also led to a further reflection upon what radio cinema, what the potential of the radio cinema is, and leading to the term affective solidarity, among others. And Susanna, I will again give the word to you to elaborate a bit on this, as this is something you have worked specifically on.
Yes, thank you, Astrid. Well, we were, as Astrid mentioned, the radio cinema format was not something that we planned for. It happened along the way, and we did decisions and made a kind of methodology along the way, and ended up presenting this project in these very diverse spaces that Astrid was describing for you. And some of what we witnessed or shared was that many of the listeners chose to be very open, or it seemed at least that people had very open reflections. Some people cried and had other kinds of emotional expressions, and we were a bit maybe not taken by surprise, or maybe yes, a bit taken by surprise, or at least we hadn't foreseen these reactions, and we were starting to reflect on what they mean, and also what is our responsibility of following people up, because this is not a methodology over time. We meet a lot of people for just one time. We listen to the episode and then we talk. And then people go out, and we never see them again. So we don't know what the episode did to them. What are their reflections a little bit later? So this article that you can see the constructing dialogues and solidarity through radio cinema in the Sami Norwegian colonial context, was an article that I submitted for a journal called Community Psychology and Global Perspective, and it was an intent to reflect critically on some of the potentialities of radio cinema and collective listening as perhaps an emancipatory project. So I was engaging in different kinds of feminist theories and writings to try to analyze or reflect on what had occurred, and this term affective solidarity that Astrid mentioned, it's a term from feminist theorists, Claire Hemmings, who tries to think of different ways in which women can strengthen connectivity. And of course, not only women assisted the radio cinema, but there was a huge part of the listeners were women. So we think it's legitimate to reflect about women's connectivity, even though men were there and also shared and were present, because there were so many women coming. And we were also this woman collective, but with, as Astrid mentioned, one Sami participant and 3 non-Sami. And so we were also kind of this prefigure in a little space of perhaps occurring similar dialogues, even though more intense and over a longer time, that these bigger listening spaces also were. So very briefly to finalize, Claire Hemmings talked about affective dissonance as a way of when epistemology and ontology, or the way you think you are and the way society sees you, clashes. For many people, or perhaps systematically, at least if these are topics that mean something to you, your being in the world can create a huge, how do you say, discomfort, incomodidad. It's not comfortable when you find out that people sees you differently, and they say your position is privileged, right? And she thinks that this feeling of dissonance between your thought you and your social you is a potential learning space. So we think that perhaps these radio cinema places where we took care of the space, we created pleasant light, we sat together in a ring, we tried to do things slow, was a kind of safer space for people to be more open and perhaps to generate more solidarity between different communities. This is, of course, not a conclusion, it's a reflection that we can share. And you can, of course, read the article if you want to think more with us about this, or make questions or commentaries right now, because we have 5 minutes. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Is there anyone that has a comment or a reflection or thought about something while you were listening? Then I will ask a short question. It is interesting to see the many different places that you've been putting up the radio cinema. Could you talk about from the quite formal political power spaces to more informal? How did was there a great difference in how it was received between the different places?
I can just start maybe, Astrid. Well, I think definitely. I think even the physical space, the infrastructure makes a difference. It's a difference to be in a classroom with the lights and to be in front of an audience, or to sit in a ring in a cave in an island, or even in a prison. We presented it also in a prison. And so people's personal experiences were very different, right? And some of the like very beautiful manifestation of solidarity and deep understanding of injustice came from the inmates in a prison where the episode was also showed. And so it's a ceremonial thing. It's a kind of rite, right? So where you are and what brought the people there and how we sit together probably have something to say or influence the kind of dialogue that we can have. Astrid, I don't know if you agree.
Yes, I really agree. And also I found it like a big difference also if we present it in a space, you could say like a Sami space. For example, we presented at the Rasta Southern Sami Festival in Røros, and we've also presented it in spaces where the majority or maybe everyone are Norwegian, and that is difference also in terms of presenting it in a Sami space. Also now very kind of in parallel with the ongoing or in the finalization of the truth and reconciliation process that we have ongoing now in Norway. I have experienced how also the radio episodes have kind of triggered more stories to appear, that the people have also used the space of the radio cinema and these conversations that the co-listening has led to also sharing more stories that are related to the ones that have been listened to. So this also has shown the great potential in this co-listening space as a safe space, you could say, not to say that all of the spaces we have created necessarily have been a safe space for everyone present, but I think it creates this, maybe some trust between when you are simply just maybe closing your eyes, being in a room, it being maybe dark, and you're listening to stories together. It kind of takes away others' distractions, and also that we have this part of the radio cinema, this last part of sharing and asking questions or commenting is as important as the listening. I think has made it into, at least I think for all of us, it has really expanded the project in a scale that we had not imagined when we first started the project.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you. And now we will change the scene, and we will move because we are going to listen to Isak. Isak practice is based here in Norrbotten. And with queer perspectives, they seek to explore various aspects of belonging by means of union of weaving, learning, and collaborative creation. Ida was trained in weaving and artistic embroidery at Friends of Handicraft in Stockholm, and has been living and working in Älvsbyn, close to here in Boden, since 2018. And Linnea Nilsson works as a craft and design consultant in Region Norrbotten. That has the craft consultancy has a mission to promote craft in the area of Norrbotten. She creates activities aimed at a broad variety of target groups, including children, youth, hobby practitioners, as well as professional crafters. An important part of her job is to make craft available and inclusive to people who usually don't participate in the practice. And I think that what we're going to listen to now is a very good example of both your practices. So we just find, so if you sit here, we'll just see.
Yes, okay, let's start. Hey everyone, as Christina said, my name is Linnea Nilsson. I work as a craft and design consultant at the Region of Norrbotten. And I will tell you a bit about this digital weaving circles that we made together with the Biennale and Älvsby Folkhögskola during the autumn and winter. And I will tell it from a project leader perspective, and then I will leave it to you, and you will present it as an artist and as a workshop leader, and we'll talk a bit about how we managed to make these circles and present some of the wins with the project, but also some challenge that we met on the way. So a short background. During COVID, me from my position had the opportunity to apply for extra finance to support professional crafters and the craft in Norrbotten. So we applied with many different projects, and this was one of them. And the working title was, we wanted to make a project where people could craft on distance, because we didn't have the opportunity to meet physically. I knew already from the start that we wanted to explore weaving, because as Christina said in the beginning, your comment about the weaving is dying, and that's something that I hear a lot in my work, and I thought, like, that's not right. We need to catch this up, and I need to have something that I can punch when I get this comment, because I didn't have that thought about the weaving in the future and now. So we wanted to have this digital workshops, but we also wanted people to be able to meet in front of the screen, but we also wanted them to make something physical with their hands while they were watching the screen. And we were really, something that was really important was to make it as available as possible for as many people as possible. So we offered these weaving circles for a really low price, so everyone that has an interest could participate. So we came up together with the idea that we could invite 50 persons for these workshops. We created a material kit. You were the expert and put it together, and I did the packaging and the logistic and send them out to 50 persons. We offered them to join 3 workshops, 2 hours each, and during the course or the workshops, you also created a Facebook group where the people that joined these workshops could also have a discussion when problems came up, or they showed each other techniques, they wanted to develop something that you had introduced for them. So it actually, the Facebook group was really a success. It almost got its own learning room, and you could follow the discussion of the participants. So it was really nice to see that that was really something that lived through the whole workshops. So to make it as available as possible, we wanted to put as little money we could, except for paying you a fair amount of money and buy materials and send them out to the participants. So we said that we are doing a live stream, and we are doing it our own with the technique that we already got. So we were just using 2 computers, 2 screens. You see my iPhone up there filming Isak's hands. So we had 2 angles of the camera, one where the participant could see you from the front, and also one from above, so you could follow your instruction when you were showing the weave. And during the way, we bumped into different problems, but we also saw these opportunities to explore if this is something that we can continue with in our work in the future. So, for example, it was not the best to have a white desk when you have a white thread and you're going to show it on the weave. But usually it was small problems that we could fix during the way. And we also find out when we had a summary that are we going to continue with this concept, and then we need to buy like heavier cameras that could also provide more sharpness. But for this workshop, it actually worked really, really good, I think, for the most of the time. So when we were reaching out to people to join this workshop, we were only advertising in our own social media channels. We were using Instagram, Facebook, Konstfrämjandets webpage, where you have your own webpage during the biennale. We also used Älvsby folkhögskola, that was a part of the project, and their social media and webpage. And I thought that, okay, if we not succeed to get 50 persons, we'll also pay for advertising, but that was actually not necessary, because just after 24 hours, we had over 70 people signing up for the course. So it was a super big interest, and I will tell you a bit about the geographical spread among the people that joined the workshops. So we reserved 30 of the spots for Norrbotten, And in Norrbotten we have 14 counties, and it was people from 8 counties that participated in workshops. So it was people from Luleå, Piteå, Jokkmokk, Överkalix, Boden, Kiruna, and Älvsbyn. But we also opened up 20 of the spots for rest of Sweden. So we had people joining from Westerbotten, Östersund, Dalarna, Värmland, Uppsala, Stockholm, Västmanland, Örebro, Östergötland, and Malmö. And the range was between, or the people was between 22 and 75 years old that joined the workshop. And also in the regions there was a really large spread where people participated from. For example, from Västerbotten we had people joining from Skellefteå, but we also had people joining from Vilhelmina, that's 4 hours from Skellefteå. So we were really glad of the spread of the participants. And I think that was because the collaboration between the biennale, between you, my social medias and followers, or what to say, and also Älvsby folkhögskola. So I think together we were able to reach people from different places from Sweden. So I think it's a really important thing to think about when you're trying to do something as available as possible, to actually collaborate together with someone, because that's really important in my work, to really be able to reach out to people. And on my own I'm not able to have this kind of spread, so we're really happy about that. And I will just show you some of the weaves that the participants made during these workshops. After we were finished, I asked them to send me pictures, and they did a little summary and told us what was good and what they wanted to be better and what they want to do in the future. So one of the participants, she sent me this picture, and she was one of the youngest. She was 22 years old participating, and she said that I never read before. I have a really big interest in craft, but I never been able to participate because the price of paying for a full craft course is usually very pricey. And she said, this is the first time, but I will continue to explore because now I can't stop weaving. So I think that comment really warmed my heart and was like really the purpose of these circles. And here you see some of the other weaves that the participants made from your instructions. And they also developed these weaves with, we provide them with the gray and white thread, but then they developed them during, between the workshops, and they also discussed different materials and how they could make the weave look more alive and where they could buy the materials. It was really nice to see actually their conversation, and they kind of had their own collaborative learning. And I will leave it to you, and you will talk more about the materials, the techniques, and the challenge that you had as an artist, but also as a workshop leader.
Yes. So I am a textile artist, educated at the Friends of Handcraft. I went there for 3 years and learned how to weave with a loom. But before that, I also was a teacher, so my background is teaching. So it felt like I would do this. It would work. But we wanted to keep the material costs as low as possible, to keep the price low. And I also was, you were talking about weaving frames and stuff like that, but I felt like it's, if you try weave this time and then you never do it again, it's very not sustainable to buy a lot of materials that you will never use again. And also it's very possible to just use a regular frame. So I chose to give them these wooden wedge frames that's easy to build yourself, so the package will be small as well. And I also chose to have these kind of small, you stir the jars of paint with these kind of sticks, and these are some eating sticks. So it's very easy materials, but you can build your own small loom with only these ones. And the first, also a fork was needed, but they could bring them. Everyone has a fork at home, so they didn't need to have it. And then we also, when you choose yarn, you have to think about what you're going to use the yarn for, because all of the knitting yarns are very soft and they break easily. So you need a very durable yarn that is also very hard spun, because we were going to do these kind of knots, and you don't want it to open up. And it's also, you will use the same yarn for both the warp and the weft. So this yarn had to have a lot of different qualities. So then I choose this, it's a Norwegian yarn called prydvävgarn that was quite suitable for this. And this is a very fine yarn, so this was pricey, but the other materials were quite not so pricey. And then, so they got the packages with these kind of material kits. Yes. And then when we started to plan the workshops, we had it 3 times, as Linnea said, and I wanted them to try different techniques for every time. And the techniques I chose were very, very common techniques, both in functional weaving, as like when you do rugs or blankets, but you can also use these techniques when weaving just picture weaves or tapestries. So they will work in many different ways, and you can combine them as much as you want in different ways. You can play around with it. So the first time I instructed them how to build this kind of small loom, and this kind of technique took a while to learn. So then we focused on just the plain weave and the tabby weave. That is the most common, but you can combine it in a lot of different ways. And actually I have my samples here, both samples before and the samples that I did during the circle. So I will send them around. But as you can see, just with the plain weave, you can do a lot of different stuff and play around with it. So that was the challenge for the first time. And then during the second time, we did this, my favorite of them all, the RIA technique, where you do these knots to get this kind of fringy look. And it's actually the same knot, the Jordes knot or the Turkish knot, that is also used in like Persian weaving when you weave rugs. So it's the same technique, it's just depending on the distance between the knot rows and like the length of this knock. So it's the same technique, but you can, depending on how you use it, you can do a million types of things. And I tried to communicate that as well during the course, so they could try different techniques. And also, if they had other yarns, they could mix them up as well, because it's always nice to mix and play. There you go. And the last time I chose to teach this kind of flat woven technique that is also very common in rug weaving, and it's the kelim, and the difference between the kelim and the this rödlakan technique that is very common in rug weaving. So then we had like these kind of techniques where you do different kind of fields with different colors, and how you can use these kind of techniques in flat weaving. Yes. And that was the things we made, but it was also only like, it's only 6 hours combined the 3 times. So it's when you have a workshop in real life, you choose to have it in like 4 hours to be able to complete it, and you try different things and be mad and then get happy again and all of that kind of things. But now it was just a startup, and then they could continue at home if they wanted to. And I was also telling them that they could combine, like for the first one they could weave just plain weave, and then they could do ria, and then in the same weave they didn't have to do different ones every time if they didn't want to. So that was the plan and how we did it. And now I'm going to talk a bit about the challenges that I met when I had what the digital course can, because this is very hands-on, it's very tactile, and you want to be able to like see what you're doing, and maybe come and help and show how to correct things and stuff like that. But that's not possible when you do it this way. And the first time it was, I was quite overwhelmed about how many there were on the other side of the screen. So I was like, oh, it's only 2 hours and 50 people. Do they have time to talk? How could we do this? So the first time was very, very quiet. And I was talking into the screen and I didn't know, it was like just talking out to thin air, and I didn't know how everyone took it, or if they understood what I said or anything. It felt really weird. So when we were done, I was like, okay, okay, this happened, I don't know. But then the other times it started to be more relaxed, and I got used to it, and we opened up to just like start asking questions whenever, and then they were a bit more brave to ask questions. And then there was also all this technical stuff, because some of the, like when I wanted to show how you do this, I will put this somewhere afterwards so you can go and look for yourself and to feel and maybe try if you want to. But I wanted an angle to show them, and I didn't have it on the camera, so it was quite hard to explain and show how to do it when you didn't have the angle. So that time I actually filmed it afterwards in another angle and put it up on the Facebook, in the Facebook group, so they could see how it was made. And also the camera from above that was going to show my instructions, and when I was weaving, it was quite blurry, and we had a hard time getting it sharp. And I also think that doing this during the winter, you don't get the clarity from the sun and the sunlight, so it was very dark outside, and that makes the camera more blurry as well. But I tried to show everything, but they didn't see what I was doing. So then I had to talk all the time and give the instructions verbally over and over and over again. So it was like, okay, over and under and in and out and do. So I had to use my voice a lot more than I do when I teach physically. Because then you can always like show once, and then you can go around and like, oh, are you getting it? But now I had to like do these instructions all the time. And when we were doing this ria knot, it felt like in the end I was like, oh, you're gonna dream about, you're gonna hear my voice in your sleep, because this is a mantra now. So over and over again. But that was quite interesting also to like, how can you explain how to weave only by your voice? I think it worked out. I mean, they saw a bit, but it wasn't that like between two threads. It's quite narrow and small, and yeah. So that was interesting. And also, like when I teach otherwise, I use a lot of the energy in the room. You feel when someone is frustrated, and then you can like meet up and show in another way. But in this kind of way, you need to trust all the participants to actually like scream and say if they don't understand anything. And otherwise, you just have to trust that they understand and follow. You can't like get them in the same way. And also, it's amazing to meet, that everyone can meet in this way across all over the country in the same like weaving circle or workshop. But at the same time, this relationship making and the intimacy was more created in the Facebook group than during the my instruction time, or how you can say it. And that kind of so my I didn't feel that I could make these relationships with the participants as I wanted to, and that is a bit frustrating. And also, I don't know what they thought, because they don't have. So I have no idea. I think it was nice.
I think the reflections after the workshops were very, very positive, but also we had a pretty short time. 2 hours is really short to learn all these different techniques. So me that was sitting in another room and trying to handle the technique, I could also watch the participants, and everyone was working, and they didn't even have the time to look up, because everyone was so into their weaving.
Yeah,
so maybe
focused.
if we would have needed 5 hours so people could sit down, take a coffee, and stuff that you normally are forced to do when you meet physically, they were not this moment. So I think that was one difference. And it also puts a lot of, not really pressure, but you have to give a lot when you're learning out to a screen and not to a face, and you don't feel the expressions. So it's something different, and I think this type of workshops, they will never be the same as when we meet physically in a room, but I think they can be a good complement, and also we're able to gather people in a group from the whole Sweden that we're not able to do. Otherwise, I don't think they would have come up to Luleå and sit in a room together from Malmö. So it gives, but it's not the same. But I think they can be a good complement to each
and
other.
I also think it's a good first time trying to see if they like it and if they want to sign up for a course and travel to do it. So it's a good first step.
And I think that was also one of the thoughts by focusing on weaving, because I think we will wrap it now. Just that young people doesn't search for the traditional handicraft from the beginning. You have to plant a seed, or you have to invite them to be interested in weaving. And I think this is a much easier way to do that than go to a group that's weaving every Thursday and say, hey, I'm interested. So it's a way of just showing what you can do with weave. Now we will stop talking.
Yes. Thank you.
And while we are working on the technique, I will just present the last speaker before the lunch, which is Rosa Tollner Clausen, that will talk about the weaving kiosk. And she is a textile designer and PhD researcher who in her work intersects between craft and design. And she often creates physical spaces around the practice of hand weaving, using craft as a catalyst for physical, social, and creative interaction. But this is also work that was staged together with Haparanda Municipality Art Department, and we have Sylvia. I'm very happy to have Sylvia with us here today. The Arts Department promotes art dynamically and inclusively with the municipality of Haparanda, as well as managing its public art and cultural heritage sites. And it was also Aina's Art Museum that was part of organizing this. And it's a museum that shows and manages an art collection that focuses on contemporary art, particularly work from the northern Finland. The museum also stages exhibitions from the permanent collection, as well as temporary exhibition, and organizes workshops and lectures. So now we're going to listen.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, Rosa.
Okay, good. Good. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Rosa Tollner Clausen. I'm a textile designer from Denmark. I'm currently living in Helsinki in Finland, and then I'm also working on my PhD studies in Gothenburg University in Sweden, in the Department of Craft. So I would like to just speak a little bit about the Weaving Kiosk project, and particularly the Weaving Kiosk edition that took place on the border between Sweden and Finland in Haparanda, Tornio, in the beginning of December last year. I will just give a brief introduction to the general kiosk project and my practice, and then I will get more specific with the Haparanda Tornio kiosk. And so my artistic practice and my doctoral studies are based in the field of hand weaving. As I said, I'm a textile designer, but since my graduation in 2013 from the design school in Kolding in Denmark, I've been focusing on hand weaving. And I've become more and more interested in the hand weaving space, and particularly in the field of leisure time or free time hand weaving. So I'm really interested in how this field have developed historically, and especially in Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, which is where I mostly move. And I'm interested in what has motivated people to keep weaving by hand, even in an increasingly industrial society or industrialized society. Then I'm interested in how has the hand weaving space and the tools developed over time. Hand weaving is a craft that, compared to knitting and crocheting, demands quite a lot of space and tools and technical knowledge and time. So I'm interested in like what has happened in these different countries in the field of leisure time hand weaving. How has that developed? What is the current state of hand weaving, leisure time hand weaving? And then through my artistic practice, I'm also interested in exploring to speculate about new types of spaces. How could hand weaving take place today? Maybe especially to attract a younger audience. And so that is what I have been working very much with since 2014. And this interest is also out of which the Weaving Kiosk grew. I think for me it's really fascinating that to also understand that hand weaving is a living craft and has been a living craft. It is not just like one idea and this is how it is, this is this type of loom that we are working with. There are so many things that has happened even just within the last 100 years. The Weaving Kiosk project was developed during 2016, and it was executed mainly between 2017 and 18. I will just actually start a presentation. I'm sorry about that. I didn't think about that. I will just share my screen, and then you have to tell me if it works. I can view full screen mode. Can you see it moving?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get stuck and then I tell a lot, and then people didn't follow at all with the images.
It is fine.
Good. So, so the Weaving Kiosk took place between 2017 and 18 with the support of the Nordic Cultural Fund. They had a special pool called Handmade that the project got funding from, the Danish Arts Foundation, and then the Danish Textile Foundation. It's from an old textile company, Grosser eller Fos Fund. And these three foundations wanted to support my exploration of whether a young audience, and by young I mean specifically between 20 and 40 years of age, whether that generation could become interested in hand weaving if the craft was made visible, accessible in urban environments, and if the idea of what can be woven by hand would be updated. I was also interested in exploring whether the handmade, self-made garment could be considered a consumer alternative. Not exclusively, not that I imagine that suddenly everybody would start to weave everything they wear by hand, but maybe to kind of start developing an attitude by a young generation that we can also wear things we make by hand together with our COS pants or Levi's jeans, or just like we do with crocheted and knitted garments. So a younger audience, accessibility, visibility, and product update. That was my goal. And maybe just to tell a bit about why this was interesting to me. I have noticed in many visits in weaving spaces around in the different Nordic countries that it is mainly an elderly group of people who are weaving by hand today, and plus 60. And I think it's amazing that they are upholding the craft and that they keep exploring and developing the craft. But I am wondering why there are so few young people. And I wonder if that is because weaving is often considered a space demanding craft. It is a space demanding craft, unless you use the small weaving frames, as I saw was in the previous presentation. There are also other small models, but most looms require space. It is a technical demanding craft, and it demands time both to set up the loom and to weave. So I wanted to understand, does it have to be like that? Can one challenge some of these notions, all of them? How could weaving also take place? It's also my observation that there are looms in most cities. So if you know a little bit people in a city, you know that there is a weaving workshop in that backyard or on that attic or in that basement. But it's very, very seldom that we see them in street view. And that's actually one of my interests here in Finland, because I find that is the North European context that I've been in, where looms are most visible in cities. But that is probably the invisibility of weaving is probably because of the cost of space and real estate. And I have also, through the kiosk, tried to challenge that, so how can one go about real estate if one needs space but does not have too much money? And then I think that sometimes it can seem that weaving is a little bit stuck product-wise, the idea of what can be woven. It's still very much rag rugs and towels and tea towels that are woven, which is completely fine, and which can be, like, there can be endless variations made. But I think it would be interesting to also challenge that idea: what can be woven? Can the hand-woven textile be combined with the industrially made textiles? Does it need to be so pure, and does it only need to be one type of product? So the weaving kiosks are mobile weaving workshops that are placed in street view, as you could see here. And this is a picture taken from the outside. They are temporary spaces. They mostly take place in urban settings, and mostly in the Nordic capitals. That's where they've been taking place. The looms are small. They're very simple. It's a Danish rigid head loom. And they're very easy to work with. You learn how to weave on these looms in 15 minutes, and then you can just continue for as long as you want. The materials in the kiosk are curated, so I tried to compose the material selection so that no matter what you do, it will become a success. Like, there will be no bad surprises, like with fiber combinations or completely off colors. Then I have been working with Finnish fashion designer Merja Hannali-Ulvinen in the development of a collection of garments that can be produced in the kiosk. And this is an example. This is an industrially produced white t-shirt, but then we have, instead of making a print on the t-shirt, we wove a tiny sample, like 2 centimeters wide, woven with thin polyester thread in both weft and warp. And actually, this is it's a plain weave. The kiosk textiles have only been plain weave variations because that's easy to work with, very fast. But the Ranu textiles, which some of you might have seen in Luleå in the exhibition, this is actually a type of mini Ranu. This is a ripsi or reps, which is a plain weave variation where the warp is completely covered. So we've also been trying to work with these old, like traditional techniques, but then just use different colors and threads. And for each kiosk, we have developed a product. So based on whether a kiosk takes place for 3 days or 30 days, like that has been the time span, we kind of have thought about, like, who would be coming here to weave. Do we think, would it be students? Would it be design interested audience? Who could it be? And how long would they want to invest in the kiosk? For example, when we've been in Copenhagen during 3 days of design, that's a design event where people move from place to place. We didn't imagine that people would want to spend a whole day weaving by us, maybe a couple of hours if we were lucky. And so then we've been trying to make a product that would only require an hour or 2 hours or 15 hours, as in the case of the kiosk in Stockholm at Handarbeitets Vänner, where we designed a backpack that people could weave a version of. So then people say, okay, I would like to weave a backpack, and then they choose the yarns and make a sample, like this is the color combination and the composition that I like, and then they weave the amount of meters that they need. And then, as said, the hand-woven textiles are often combined then with an industrially made T-shirt or straps on a backpack, or that is different. You can see more products on my website if you're interested. So I've had, you also don't have to weave a product. I have to say, you can also just come by and weave, which is something surprisingly many people have been doing, that they just want a couple of hours of weaving, or they come back a couple of days to weave in a row, and they just want to try a different loom every day and just experiment. So there are many different motivations to come by. I've held 8 planned kiosks, 1 in Copenhagen, 1 in Stockholm, 1 in Reykjavik, and then 5 in Helsinki, approximately every second month for a year. And each of these kiosks were all in different locations. And then afterwards, by the end of 2018 until now, I've held 3 kiosks by invitation. 1 for Google as part of a tech conference in 2018. 1 in China, in Hangzhou, in the textile triennial there. And then the one now in as part of Luleå Biennial in Tornio, Haparanda. The kiosks are always free, and you don't have to sign up to weave. Sometimes when there's been really a lot of people, then we have made a schedule so that you don't go in vain too much. So each space city event affects the kiosks. Like it's been held in galleries, holiday closed offices, culture houses, fab labs, libraries. The first 8 kiosks were much more in my control, is something that I can see afterwards. The 3 last kiosks have been kiosks where I've had to compromise, like where I've had to adapt the original concept, and also just sometimes say, okay, now we try this because that's the way it is. And then and I think that's good for my research, to be able to step back or beside and then look at the project and then see what works and what didn't. And in that sense, the kiosks are a constant learning process for me and learning room. And this was also the case in Haparanda, Tornio, naturally. The kiosk here took place in Rajala shopping center. You can just see the 10 other spaces beside Rajala where the kiosk took place. Yeah, so it took place in the shopping center between, like just on the border between Finland and Sweden. And it took place in an old hairdresser, or an empty former hairdressing salon. And this is the most commercial setting I've ever been in. So just my neighbors were H&M and shops for buying glasses and like all these big chains, which was really, really interesting. I did have my own entrance, which was really nice. So my opening hours were independent of the shopping center. It was an urban setting, but it was a very different urban setting than I'm used to. It is of course not a capital, but I understand that it is very urban in that context, and in my research up around Haparanda, Tornio, I was also driving a lot around in the area, and I did also feel that I really came back to the city in the evening when I came back to Haparanda or Tornio. So this different type of urbanity is something that I need to consider much more, like what is actually urban, what does urban mean? This space had a beautiful visibility, like people passing by all the time, and also from the opposite side of the road, which was outside. It was really, really optimal visibility. I did not know what to expect in Haparanda, Tornio, because my network is so small there. So I prepared 3 looms that were set up in plain kiosk setup. And then I prepared 3 looms that were just pure play setups for me, because I was thinking, like, if nobody comes to weave, then I can just weave on those and have fun this week. And if somebody comes to weave, then they can just use those and have fun on those as well. All the furniture was borrowed from Eine Museum. And I have to mention, this is also a big thing, a change for me, both this to borrow furniture, because usually I've been bringing my own kiosk furniture also in order to take over the space. But the furniture, the kiosk furniture is just completely worn down now. So either it needs an update, or this could also be an approach. There's also something to reflect about. I also changed the looms, which will also need a lot of reflection on my side, because I brought a much more technical loom than I usually do. This is a Japanese Tokyo Teoriki 8-shaft loom, and of course that gives a completely different entry to the weaving process. And I think that there were some really interesting observations, like how does one access the weaving process, the fascination of the red metal loom for experienced weavers. Like there were a lot of things here to consider. Then the audience was older than I am used to. I think people were mainly plus 50. The younger audience that I'm used to from the capitals started to come by the end of the week, and I'm really wondering what would have happened if I had stayed a week longer. Who would have entered then, and would it have been more word by mouth? Then I think that the older weavers also had a different experience, like craft-wise. They were experienced knitters, dyers, knew how to sew, and they brought their own yarn in some cases. And they all had sewing machines. So basically I didn't sew that week because nobody wanted to sew. They just wanted to take the textiles home. And that is also, that's an interesting, that I have never tried before, that the sewing machine was not an interesting resource. Then there was an elderly man that came for 4 days in a row to weave. He visited one day and then he came back. And he was a very interesting encounter because he hadn't woven before. And I've been considering a lot now in hindsight. He was not really having much to do with the other people there. He just came and wove. He changed loom every day. And earlier in my research, I've been thinking about how the weaving space is not a community space, as we usually consider vævstugan, like the traditional weaving workshops. Here people pass through. And I think he was a very good example of a man who just enjoyed being there and developed day by day his weaving skills. And then we don't see anymore. So that's also something for me to think about. There was just an example of some natural dyed yarns that had been brought by a weaver. This time I documented daily through Polaroids because we would like to make a small movie about this kiosk. And then the photographs that you're watching here in the presentation is made by one of my friends and a photographer who has documented most of the kiosks and most of my projects. And he could only come one day. So we decided that the Polaroids are like instances, and it was kind of a dogma every day that I had to do 3 Polaroid pictures. And that was really also an interesting media for me, because I think the Polaroid, because they're so valuable, these pictures, they're super expensive. So like what's important and what's not important to photograph. And I think they very much underline the momentariness or the temporariness of the weaving kiosk. And then I just wanted to mention collaboration, which is something that I've been thinking a lot about with this kiosk, how smooth everything has gone, how I'm working a lot with notions of hospitality and guests and hosts in participatory projects. By taking a participatory project somewhere, I am the host, but I'm also the guest in an institution or in a space. And this collaboration was really, really optimal. I've really felt being listened to and met, and in all ways, like space, furniture, press, the Rajala space. So there was so much to to consider here in relation to like what's an optimal collaboration for me. And then I would just end with a picture of a baby on a swing in the kiosk, because this is also the first time that I brought my little child in a kiosk. And this also creates reflections about hospitality and having visits and participatory projects, because having a child in a weaving space can actually be really fun and very inviting. But something that I also need to consider much more now going forward is that it is also super hard to stand between the participant and him, and like how to navigate in that. That has been very different this time, and I've been relying way more on friends and family. So all these observations and experiences made in Haparanda, Tornio, has been very, very fruitful for my practice and my research. And it's been a great setting to get to know, and I'm super grateful for the possibility of participating in the biennial. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosa. Is there anyone in the audience that would have any questions about the weaving kiosk, about collaboration? Yeah, Ramil, maybe you should have that one.
I'm just interested now. I've been thinking the 3 presentations about the concept of affective solidarity that was introduced in the first one. So maybe it's more of an observation. I think it's so important that you say it's not a community in some cases for some people. And it would be so interesting to look at what are the kind of solidarities that are formed between whom, also borrowing the furniture, between the people that come, which kind of people come, the experts or the learners, and then also the solidarities formed in relation to the donations, and then maybe also in relation to the support networks, like the family and the care network around you or around others. And I think that would be so interesting to take that kind of political dimension to this kind of work. And I wonder if the solidarities are different in Google setting. And maybe you have a reflection on that. Which kind of solidarities are you interested in creating? And do you get something from Google? Do you get something through H&M next door? And what do you get from that?
Yeah. Well, I think so. I didn't hear the first couple of presentations today, unfortunately. But I think that I think it's really interesting what you're pointing out. I've been working a lot with hospitality in the weaving kiosk, around the weaving kiosk project, and especially guest host relationship, because it's like, as I mentioned, I'm both the guest and the host. There's also really interesting. There's been some really interesting experiences in some areas here in Helsinki, where the participant become host and start to introduce other weavers to what we're doing and what is possible in the space. There's also there's something about exchange there also, that the kiosk is free, and I've noticed that people get very confused about something being free. So what can we give back? And that can sometimes be to help me if somebody doesn't speak English or Swedish. Then they go in and translate. A guy cooked one evening for everybody in the kiosk as a kind of, I would like to give something. So there are some really interesting exchanges taking place, I find, when you take money out of the equation. And then I think that a reason why participants have been able to act as hosts, which I'm really happy about them doing, that has been because of the looms that you saw in the beginning, the wooden looms. They're very, very easy to work with. And as I say, people master them in 15 minutes. And I have seen that, and they're very unusual also, is important to mention, in Sweden and Finland. So when I've been traveling around with those experienced weavers, don't know this type of loom. And then they go to the inexperienced weaver and ask, so what are you doing here? What type of loom is that? And then the experienced weaver who just started half an hour ago, they're experts already, and they can start to explain and introduce. And I think there are some really, really interesting dynamics here taking place because of the tools and also the setup of the kiosk, and there's a lot of this that I'm trying to work with, but I've mainly been working under the umbrella of hospitality and yeah.
Wonderful, Rosa. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. It was really lovely to listen to you. I'm looking forward to follow your work and your PhD as well. Thank you so much
for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
You keep returning in a number of different conversations that we keep having through the Learning Room program. So the work has been, that is really exciting for us. The work has been really kind of influential firstly in terms of how we've been developing the biennial, but now also how we've been thinking about the biennial once it's out there and it's in relation to other people and other formats and other events and other questions. So Silja's joining us from Kirkenes in Norway. So I will leave the floor to you, Silja. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm starting with this this picture of this piece because I wasn't sure how familiar you were with my works. No, I understand that you are, but this is kind of a typical piece of mine. It's consisting of things that I've been having lying around and things that I've found, and it's kept together by tension and gravity alone. I don't make permanent changes on my pieces or the pieces that my pieces consist of. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my own art, but I'm also going to talk about the tradition that I come from in some length. This is a floating pier. It's located in the kind of sea salmon fishing village that's my family is part of. The sea salmon population is collapsing, so I think we should end this tradition, but this floating pier is made by the members of this little village. It's a seasonal village, so this is where we stay at the summers. That little cabin in the background is my cabin, or used to be. I gave it to my sister. If you look at the floating pier, I think the only thing that has been collected when the pier was made is those little blue, not little, those huge blue cans here. They used to contain like this firefighting foam that they used at the airport for drills. And then, somebody knew someone at the airport and knew that, these might be lying around, and they were gathered for the construction of this floating pier. But everything else was kind of things that were lying around or had been stored, or maybe was part of other constructions at that time. And in this tradition, I'm talking about it as a design tradition, and it's a tradition of improvisation. So you yourself, you make whatever you need, and in this case, what was needed was a floating pier. And let's say the aesthetical outcome is, of course, based on what you need to make, but also the materials that you have at hand, the knowledge that you have, and I think also to some extent the knowledge that you don't have, because I think that gives you a certain kind of creativity, not knowing, how to solve things. The landscape, the climate, for instance, here this pier needs to be so light that you can take it up when the winter comes, so the ice doesn't come and take it away. If you look at it, you see these, the handrails, they are made by aluminum, and this aluminum was the window sills at the hotel. And the hotel was damaged in a fire, huge fire, many years ago. And then someone, went up there, had a look around, asked, may I have this aluminum? And I think also when I talk about, the knowledge that you have kind of leads you to certain solutions. My father was a welder. There's a lot of metal involved in all his projects. If you look at this little one, that's actually the logo of the bank there. And the bank did not sponsor this pier, but they did sponsor the football field when I was a kid, where I lived. So, but that football goal was in, like full league size. So it was an open goal for all summer. Nobody could save anything. And then the fathers came with their tools and they downsized it and they welded it back together. And this was kept in a heap somewhere, and now it's in the floating pier. If you look at this one, the pole here, there's no electricity out here. There's no running water, no electricity, no signal. So this electric pole comes from the other side of the fjord. You can see it still has even the ceramic isolator. And there's no need for that. Actually, there's no need for the full length of this pole. But you never know, in your next project and in the next life of that pole, maybe that length is perfect. So you don't change if you don't have to, because everything is also a storage for a new project or the next project. So in this case, with the floating pier, there was a clear problem. Let's say a problem that had to be solved. We needed a pier. It needed to move with the tide, and the material was gathered to make this, and the kind of communal knowledge was put together to make this tier. I think in other cases, as with this one, I think the materials comes first, and they have kind of a clear lead of what they can become. This used to be a shoe hay beating pole, for when you need to beat your shoe hay, as we do, to put in your shoes. And there are kind of standardized tools for that, not something that you can buy, but there's a certain way of making them, and this doesn't look like that. But I think in the landscape in the north of Norway and Finland, there's just so much barbed wire lying around from the Second World War, and I think sometimes the material gives the lead, so I can become this, and you kind of have to be open for that material input. I talk about this as a design tradition, and when meeting institutions like museums or schools or universities, it sometimes can be a bit difficult to agree that this is design, and it can be difficult to agree that this is a tradition. I think the problem with calling it design today is that very often design is connected to one maker, and that one maker has kind of a claim on the object that is made. Let's say, take Arne Jacobsen's chairs. So he made those chairs, and the value those chairs have is still kind of connected to his name. And if you make something, even if you make a change on those chairs at home in your kitchen, you kind of devalue them because they're not worth as much as they used to be after your tinkering with the back of the chair. Also, if you copy them and you sell them, that's a problem. You'll get sued. But whereas in this tradition, if you copy something, if you copy someone's good solution, it means that it works. So design is not connected to money and to earning money by your design in this design tradition, which it is when you are like a modern producer. I think also when it comes to talking about this as a tradition, I mean, if you look at this one, so you bought the mailbox. This is in Finland, northern Finland somewhere, and obviously the stick on the flag has been something else, maybe some kind of drying rack, I don't know, but the hole already there, and that was suited this project well. But it also means that very, very often some of the objects, they consist of things that has been other things. So there's difficult to go backwards. I mean, for archaeologists, there's not much things to find because they go into other projects easily. So they kind of disappear out of history in the way we think of traditions. Also, I think one of the ways that we think of traditions is like, you know, in typologies and in, okay, so this is how a chair looked in the Roman Empire. It had 3 legs because it needed to stand on the battlefield, and then it developed, and then it looked different. And in this design tradition, you don't even have typologies. Very often it's one single thing that you need to have. And you have to make it yourself because your need is so specific. So there's nobody else who has made it for you. So you can't sort it into typologies, and you can't see that movement through history, where a chair had 3 legs and then 4 legs. So, and that are ways that we are used to thinking about tradition and used to thinking about design. That kind of clashes with this design tradition, this Sami design tradition that I come from. I think it's important to recognize it both as design and as a tradition, even though we can't say that it looked like this 1,000 years ago and then it looked like this now, because it's a way of sustaining yourself and supporting yourself. So when I go to my wood workshop, I don't pretend that I have a problem that I need to solve. But I'm trying to tap into that kind of material logic, or kind of see if I can also in the wood workshop or in the workshop studio find a way that where I can give the material a leading role. And this is a stack. It's very basic in the tradition and in my work. It came to be when I was working on another piece, because to be able to work in this tradition, you need to have nodes of things. I mean, you need to save everything. You need to save that stick and that piece of tarp and with the styrofoam, and you just don't throw anything away. And it quickly becomes cluttered. So I made these kind of open stacks to be able to see what I had in the workshop. And they're open in the middle so that I can see sticks from both sides. Oh yeah, that's that stick. It's yellow on one side, but it has a piece of Velcro on the top. And after a while, I realized that, okay, but these stacks are actually much better than the things that I'm currently working on. And being an artist, I just elevated it a little bit, so it's not hanging in straps from the ceiling. These are the 2 pieces that are now on the ground floor where you are. They don't look exactly the same. They often don't. I change my pieces frequently. But sometimes when I work, I need that kind of lead, you know, because it's hard to make things when your only way of thinking is, okay, but does this piece of wood go together with this piece? So I gave myself the task of making something that was freestanding and that could stand by only gravity and tension. And these are pieces that I've been working on for a long time. I mean, I think I made the first one 2011. This is the same piece. You can see this long stick with the red tape on it is now in this piece. So they move around a little bit, and that depends on how I feel about it, but also, you know, taste and development. They are 10 years apart, these 2 now. And I used that piece of foam to pack some pieces that I sold. So yeah, they changed. And what happened when these pieces met the ground floor at the Havre magazine is that, you know, it's such a forest of pillars. And it just didn't make any sense for me to add another pillar. I think if I'd come into the room with, say, 42 of these pieces, it would absolutely have made sense to add them to the forest of pillars. But they were 2, and there were all these pillars, and the pillar is like such a great support for construction, so I ended up attaching this one directly to one of the pillars. So then it changed again. Then I took some of these pieces and added them to the constructions at Luleå Biennial. This is styrofoam, and actually myrull, which is something like cotton grass in English, or even ängsvad in Swedish, is this little white puffball that grows where the land is wet. I like working with styrofoam. I like working with oak. I mean, there's no hierarchy between the materials. What works, works. And we had to do some kind of emergency drainage with the house, and this styrofoam from Russia turned out. This was before the war, when the contractors in Kirkenes bought a lot of their materials from Russia. The cotton grass, you know, there's so much cotton grass growing around, and I was wondering, so why don't we use it in the tradition? There's just so much, and there's these little fibers, and it's so bright white, and I collected so much cotton grass. I mean, really, I collected so much cotton grass, and I wanted to see what I could do with it, and I started to cut it and boil it, and adding components to see if I can kind of felt them together, and cotton grass is just hopeless to work with. I mean, there's a reason we don't use it in the tradition, and it's because it's utterly useless. I think sometimes it has been used as like this pillow filling, and that's it, more or less. But what happens when you boil cotton grass is that it goes brown, which was a total surprise. And we will come back to that later, because when you boil something in water, then suddenly you have all of this brown water, and being from the tradition I'm from, could not just throw it away. But we'll come back to that. I like everything in my pieces to be visible. I don't like to create illusions. So the hanging of this piece is very visible on the wall. And I like when that happens, that the hanging is actually part of the piece and not something that you hide somewhere else. This is a piece that I made at Jaspis in, I think, 2012. It's a slate that I found with these holes. It was a student project at Konstfack, and I added these twigs. And I was invited to exhibit, I think, at Sami Daidagårders, and I thought, okay, well, I bring the slate. They've got twigs and colourstock. And I tried remaking it, and I just couldn't. I've never been able to create this piece again. And that's something that happens, because it's a bit of this ephemeral nature of these works. You know, I think I can recreate it, and then I just can't. It was part of the moment and part of exactly those pieces that I could get my hand up there and then. So all that exists now of this piece is this kind of low resolution mobile photography, and that's all, but that's also part of it. I never use any kind of Sami identity markers in my work. I'm a Sami artist. I come from a Sami design tradition, but I've been afraid of being forced into that position where we have to add something that someone from outside the group will recognize as Sami, to be a Sami artist. So I never do that. And this is the exception. If you look at this braid, they are typically used on belts in my area, and I weave belts and like these through ribbons. And I got the knack for that, but I'm really, really crap at these braids. So this is a practicing braid that I made in nylon, because in the original tradition you make them in this woolen yarn, and it felts together and it's hard to work with. So I needed to practice on something easier, and I had this braid lying around, and I added it to the piece, and the piece was finished. But I think that's and there's also like this brass circle for those who are familiar with that tradition. But I think this is the only piece that I have that has any kind of Sami identity marker added into it. I've also done quite a lot of drawing. When you grow up in the north of Norway, I think the same is the case for the whole Sami community, you don't learn a lot about your own history. So you kind of have to read up on your own. So I've been reading scientific reports from archaeologists and anthropologists, and reading about the Sami Stone Age and so on. And these are books that I kind of have lying around with no plans of actually doing something in my practice with them. And then there was a time where I just really wanted to draw. I wanted to sit down and draw, and just sit for a while. But there wasn't anything that I particularly wanted to draw. I wanted to see what does the line do when it meets the paper, and what does a felt tipped pen do, and what does a pencil do, and that's always my interest, the material. Also, I can't really draw, so I couldn't have started to draw horses or hands or anxiety or happiness. So copy is such a gift to be able to copy something. And I had these reports these are a mix actually from Reine Tanner and Paul Simonsen from the 1920s and the 1950s. And in the beginning I sat with their reports and I tried to copy as accurately as I could. And after a while I started to filter these drawings through my memory, and it looks quite abstract, but it's very, very concrete. These circles in the background, they are migrating patterns from the Skolt Samis in my areas. And there are two layers here. There's one in the foreground, and that's because I've used this tracing paper that interior architects use a lot. I'm trained as an interior architect. And it was just by coincidence that these two papers were stacked on top of each other, but I like when things happen that I don't control too much. And one of the things that happened when I started to filter things to memory was that it started to look like something else. So to me this looks a little bit like maybe islands or something that are mirrored in the ocean, but it's actually a dwelling place from the Sami Stone Age. And this is the cotton grass again. So when I've been working with the cotton grass a lot, I had bottles and bottles and bottles of this rich brown color. And I wasn't too happy with my progress with the cotton grass, not because it wasn't so easy to form or to shape it, but also because I don't really like to give shape. I like to see what can the material do without me. So if the material can decide, what will it be? And I had to do a lot of shaping with that cotton grass, and in the end I started just splashing into other sculptures, as you saw in the previous picture. And then I had all these bottles with dye, and I also had this kind of like this anti-slip mats lying around that you put under your rugs so you don't fall and hit your head. And I just soaked them in this water and I put them on the paper. And on the back side of some of these paper are like these line drawings from archaeology that I wasn't too happy with. And sometimes it shines through because the paper gets so wet, but not on this one. And it takes 2 or 3 days to dry because it's not really a dye. So sometimes it molds before it dries, and I like that too. I'm going to end this presentation with a spatial project that I did. This is the stack again, back to the stack. I don't really like making anything that is bigger than my own body because it's inconvenient to make something where you can't in a way be on both sides at the same time. So for me, when working with bigger spatial project, one of my solutions have been repetition. So this is from Søstrene Suse in Oslo a couple of years ago. And for those of you who are very observant, this piece is Iverioks. I'm very happy to be exhibited next to him. Okay, let me try and end the screen sharing.
Great. Ooh, that was very nice. Sorry, that was a bit jarring. Nice to see you in kind of full view now, Celia. Thank you for your presentation. I'm going to open it up to the floor for some quick questions. We have a few minutes, so there might be some kind of urgent questions, or I will chip in. Is there any questions? Yeah, we have one from the back.
Can I speak in the microphone?
Yeah, please.
Hi, Celia. Hi, this is Misa del Valle, Finland-based Basque artist. Thank you for your presentation, really nice. Very well justified the tradition you're coming from. However, do you know there are generations of artists in the Basque Country that are working very formally, very similarly? So when I saw your pieces here in the museum, I was taken to how people are working in Basque Country. I'm very curious to know if you are aware of what's going on there. They follow the wake of Jorge Oteiza, who was like a well-known Basque artist, modern 20th century, and it has created such a strong influence in the area and they come from spiritual solemnity and mixed with ethnology about the Basque history and the Basque people, but so different, completely different approach from yours. Are you aware of this? Have you?
No, I wasn't, so thank you for telling me. I'm talking about this as a Sami design tradition, but it's absolutely not a unique Sami design tradition, it's just very typical. I mean, the design tradition itself is mostly, I think, I'd say a rural design tradition that you find in very many places. I also think from my Sami background, I think that piece that on the last picture by Ivry is kind of the one who went first for us. So we are several Sami artists who are working in his tracks. I mean, I wouldn't call myself very spiritual in my work, but I think, sometimes just aiming for that place in your work where language is not longer valid.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to congratulate you for not speaking about what should not be spoken, which encompasses the real value of your work. So.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I did not know. But I know that this way of working is universal somehow, even though I speak about it as a Sami design tradition.
Thank you very much.
Any last comments, remarks, questions? We have literally 2 minutes. Anybody? Or maybe I jump in then and silly ask you a question. Kind of reverting back to these kind of Sami design tradition, you've also, through kind of conversations that we've had throughout the biennial, you've referred to them through certain conversations, like, for example, you won't chop a piece of wood that you find. You avoid gluing, even though sometimes you might glue something. But so there are a series of principles, and I'm kind of curious to know whether these principles are also kind of in circulation, and how are they circulated? So they're not necessarily catalogued in any way, they're not written down, but are they kind of in circulation in other forms, in other kind of traditions, maybe oral tradition, or through certain types of kind of sharing between family members, etc.? Where did you learn these?
Okay, well, that was a really difficult question. Well, I'd say that no, not really, because I think when you think about this tradition, it's really about storing things for later use, and kind of devaluing the piece if you change it because in the next project this shape might be perfect. And I can't say that this is part of the oral tradition or like doji in general. Quite the opposite. I like what Lisa said at the opening when she talked about, you know, how perfect a doji has become and how perfect the materials has become and how she wanted to get away from that. So that was really interesting to me because I'm not looking for the perfect material. Doji has for a long time now been looking for the perfect material, but perhaps in a way going in the other direction, which I think is interesting. And I know I didn't ask the question, but I don't think I can.
That's okay too. But we are going to say thank you. Thanks for today, and thank you for contributing to the biennial in such a kind of rich way. Thank you, Celia.
Thanks for inviting me.
Great. I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then let you take it from there. Will you be sharing the presentation?
No, I would like to just talk.
Okay, great.
That's okay?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an introduction. So Maya Charluk Jakobsen is an interdisciplinary researcher moving between anthropology, archaeology, and ethnology. Maya is involved in experimental archaeology around, which I find fascinating, pre-electric tattooing tools. I'm looking forward to hearing about that a bit more. And methods and craft in the form of hands-on tattoo practice. So you work as a kind of interdisciplinary researcher, also as a practitioner yourself, and you're going to kind of share some of your kind of thoughts and thinking around this. But you're also joining us from Greenland today. Is that correct?
I am.
And I'm sorry, I couldn't exactly say whereabouts in Greenland because it's way too complicated for me to pronounce. But it starts with a Q and then the second letter is an E, and then it goes to a Q again. So I'll let you do that without embarrassing myself. So welcome, Maya.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Maya Charluk Jakobsen, and I am from Qeqertarsuaq in Greenland. That was the word that you had a hard time pronouncing. It means the big island. It's not where I am today. I am in the capital of Greenland, Nuuk, and it is 4 hours earlier than you guys, and it's a lovely day here. And as you said, I'm an interdisciplinary researcher, and I'm originally a trained tattooer. I am not a trained academic at all. I have learned along the way. So I started my research by the very logical way. I was looking for like the visuals, the patterns of the Inuit tattoo tradition. And as a tattooer, I was curious, literally, what the tattoos would look like, and later on how they were made. And I also started doing them and started learning the old techniques, and which all has led me to travel around in Alaska, Canada, and spend a lot of time on my motherland, Greenland, but I live in Denmark. So after collecting all these patterns, I kind of realized that I was dealing with something quite big and something no one had really touched in on before. And that is almost 13 years ago, and I haven't looked back. I'm still busy and getting more and more involved with it. And you know, parallel with the research, I have been practicing Inuit tattooing, and have tattooed like hundreds of Inuit women and a few men too. So after realizing that there were so many patterns, I felt the need to understand like the distribution of patterns and the genealogy of things and our peoples, and we are like very, very many tribes that are spread over a huge landmass, which we call Inuit, which is the land of the people, but in the modern terms, it's Siberia, it's Alaska, it's parts of Canada and Greenland. And I started placing the patterns like on an imaginary card, a map, if you will, that was the first stepping stone for me to understand that the order of things and the importance of these patterns, how old they were, and how they traveled with the people during the migration from Siberia to East Greenland, and where people settled and how the patterns settled with them. But I was, in the beginning, mainly consumed with the immaterial part of this, of our culture. I understood that it was spiritual, and I needed to learn as much as I could about the religion, which also was a subject in the research of our people that was barely touched in on. So I did a lot of work that nobody had done before, and without being a trained researcher. Along the way, I started working with other tattoo researchers, and they made me aware of the importance of the material part of the practice, and I started looking at the tools, and as a tattooer, it was, quite clear that all the descriptions on how the tattoos were made were not completely correct. I would think, like, this is not possible, so why not try it and see how it would work? And we have, from the Arctic, we have a few tools that have been, in ethnographic collections, and we have a handful of descriptions. All the descriptions are made by people who are not tattooers. They are like anthropologists, or even a captain from one of the ships that was doing survey in Canada. And so what I did was I started testing. I made replicas of the tools and started testing out the way of tattooing, and which led me to be part of a project of with archaeologists, where we were testing out tools from other places in the world too. And so that has been very interesting. And what I did find out is that the tattooing methods of the Arctic are quite unique. We do what is popularly called skin stitching, which is a form of tattooing where you have an eyed needle and a sinew thread that is dipped in the pigment, and you pull it through the skin like laterally, instead of tattooing vertically like most people do, or most techniques will be like tattooing vertically. So instead of doing that, the Arctic peoples in North America have found out to tattoo and use the tools that the women were using anyways for making clothing. And like, Inuit women must be like the world champions of sewing in seal skin and bear skin, and the difference of tattooing in live skin is not that big, and the results were quite amazing. But I also found out when I started doing the skin stitching that there are things that you cannot do, and that's when I started looking at the other tools from the ethnographic collections, and I figured out that it is the same technique, just with other tools. again, making the tattooing of the Arctic quite unique, having more tools for the same technique and using the same tools for more, in more different ways, which is not seen anywhere else in the world. So in collaboration with other researchers, we decided to take it a step further and testing out more pre-electric tattoo tools and photographing the healing result. We did it in human skin on a live person who dedicated his leg to science bravely. And all the photographs, like in the beginning, the first week we would photograph it every day, and then like every 2 weeks, and then every month, and figured out that every technique and every tool leaves a kind of signature, which makes it possible for us to see how mummified human remains that are tattooed, how they were tattooed. So we can now make theories about 5,000 years old tattoos, which techniques were used. So this was like kind of a side project to the research in my own culture with the religion and the tattoo practice of the Inuit. And but it made me understand a lot deeper my own tattoo practice. So in the midst of all of this, I kind of participated in starting a revival of our tattoo practice, which had been in Greenland gone for 250 years. And the revival is widespread. It is both in Canada, Alaska, and Greenland. And I'm kind of observing it now. It is going very fast, and now I can observe how modern day people with the Western mindset have a need to individualize tribal tattooing, where tribal tattooing in its form really is the same tattoo again and again and again. So I am documenting how the patterns are changing because of this need, and how people are removing the practice from the original spirituality, from ritual, from ceremony, and making it more an identity marker. So there's like a lot of branches in my research and in my work, and it is kind of interesting being the person who is advocating cultural preservation, also being the person who is igniting a revival that is working against cultural preservation. And I'm just trying to observe and document and see how the human mind works around this. When you have like a people in a post-colonial situation where nation building and identity is taking such a big space in our societies. So that is basically a few of the many caps that I'm wearing are surrounding this. But my research has, you know, revealed a huge pattern base that is telling stories of both migration, genealogy, and spirituality. There's a lot in the religion where through the tattoos we can see which phase of this ever-developing religion, where which phases kind of stopped and where they developed on. And in Greenland we have both the oldest phase and the newest, which is interesting because we are like the people who are furthest away from Siberia, where everything starts for us. so working with other scientists or leaning against their research, I have the opportunity to add to their ideas of the migration of our peoples, which is a big question, you know. When did what happen and how did we develop, not only spiritually, but also the living circumstances are very, very different from territory to territory, and how the spirituality and the tattooing and the tool making and the mythology and how everything is actually following the landscape rather than the mind of the people. And this is something that I'm trying to disseminate, that the landscape really is the key to explain the people who live in it. The Arctic being, you know, so overwhelmingly decisive as it is, with its weather and its climate and conditions where tiny human beings are trying to survive, you know. So the tattoos are like a really big indicator of how they did that, and was never regarded very important before. Only, you know, superficially touched in on. So it has taken a lot of time to be heard, basically, because I'm a Greenlandic woman and I am not academically trained, and I'm not in an academic institution like a museum or a university. So basically, I have had to be quite insisting on showing people my work and the results of it and the ideas of it. And it's beginning to open up, and people are seeing the work that I'm doing now. Meanwhile, surrounding us, the revival is just exploding and going at a high speed, you know. So the dissemination is kind of always behind the revivals. So people are reusing the practice or reinventing the practice. In tattoo research, we always talk about revival and reinvention. Those two things are very different, but it depends on how people are using it, and no one can control that really. So amongst Inuit, it's definitely a reinvention, and it's going very, very quickly. And so I'm just trying to disseminate as much as possible for people to understand what it is that they are using. But everybody's so hungry for reconnection to the old culture that, and we have the internet now, so it goes quick. Yeah? So that's basically the things that I do. I work with immaterial culture and the material parts of the immaterial cultural practice that I'm researching. That's the main job that I do.
Thank you, Maya. I might just kind of follow in before I open it up to the audience with a quick question, and it is around this kind of pattern base, and as you've kind of mentioned a couple of times, these ideas are around dissemination. Can you say a little bit about how you disseminate what you do? I mean, clearly there are a number of different ways that you're doing that, and different methodologies and kind of processes that you're working with. Maybe you can expand a little bit on how the work is disseminated.
Sure. I do it in different ways. First of all, from human to human, one person at a time. Every time I'm tattooing, I make sure that the woman knows exactly what the purpose of the patterns are. And it's a very Western mindset to say, what does it mean? Like we could make a list with a symbol and that means this, that means that, you know. But it's not that simple, because the patterns are like 4,000 years old at least, and have had a development So if you ask me what they mean, I will say where and when. It kind of depends on, but the purpose sort of never changes, and the purpose of the tattoos and the specific patterns are way more interesting than what it symbolizes, really. And so I make a great effort with every client that I have that they understand what it is that they're getting. Also, if they do choose to have a contemporary version, that they understand that it is a contemporary version and not from the tradition. So that's like the human to human dissemination. But I also, write articles. I'm co-authoring a few articles with other scientists and writing like academically for in various places. And I get interviewed so much. All over the world, there are articles where I don't understand why they want to hear from me in Brazil, but basically they do. So, but also I do public talks, and I'm also in a bunch of podcasts, and I just kind of take every platform that I am invited to try and reach my people so they get as much information as possible. Everybody asks me when is the book coming, and after 12, 13 years of research, I'm beginning to feel ready to put something down in written form for Inuit people. But I'm raised very traditional, and you're not supposed to speak until you're sure. Also, I was very, very scared of, making the mistakes of the prior writings about the tattooing, which is filled with assumptions. I wanted to be more sure, and it takes a lot of time when you are researching things that are laying outside of the collective memory. So when you are doing that, you just need to take the time. But as I said, the revival is going so quick. So it's time now. It's time to do it. And so I'm planning on doing like a little book series of where I'm explaining immaterial culture and the tattooing and the patterns and the distribution of patterns amongst our people, etc. But a lot of human-to-human contact is very important.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to open it up to the audience. Are there any kind of questions, comments, reflections? We have one from Rom, yeah? Rom.
Hi, thank you. Very, very interesting. I have a question, maybe two questions. One, I'm very curious, this dynamic of revival and reinvention. And you say that in that process, maybe it's the visual has become divorced from the previous spiritual element. So I'm wondering which bits are being revived and reinvented. Is it the patterns are also the tools being rediscovered, the traditional techniques and tools? Is it then the practice as well as the visual that's being reinvented? And then I have a second question, which is about, you speak very much about disseminating to reach your people. I wonder if you are wary of cultural appropriation outside and for other purposes. And again, this distancing from the original material, spiritual, as well as visual practice.
Well, those are both great questions. The revival is primarily on the patterns, but most of the practitioners, I think there's around 15 of us spread out on Inuit Nunat, where a majority of them are in Canada. I think there are 4 in Alaska, and then there's me and my former apprentice here in Greenland. And almost all, if not all, are at least hand poking. So Inuit tattoos are not really made with machines like the contemporary tattoo machine, but that might also have something to do with that the other practitioners are not trained tattooers. And hand poking is a relatively simple way to learn tattooing. And it kind of like, as we say in Danish, it smells like fish, right? It's at least not contemporary work. But hand poking was also done amongst Inuit traditionally, but it is just not the main way of tattooing. That would be the skin stitching, but the skin stitching is quite hard to do, and I know that some people are doing it a little bit. As for patterns, there is like a general consensus that people are using the pattern base from the Inuit tattoo practice, but really they're quite redrawn. So, for instance, here in Greenland, our chin tattoo would be like 12 lines, perhaps, like fanning out from the lower lip to the bottom of the chin. Nobody has that. Because we are also living in a world where Western beauty standards have taken over, and it's just too big a tattoo. And so there is like a reinvention of the patterns, but they are leaning on the old practice. Which brings me to the question about cultural appropriation. And I'm not too worried about it, as we are not using the original pattern base. So if Inuit are not considering that when they do just one chin line, that's actually an Amazonian tattoo, but they call it Inuit tattoo now. You know, the single line chin marking is so global. It's everywhere, and so I'm not too worried about appropriation, to be honest. I'm more worried about Inuit changing the practice themselves and removing it from the original. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, Rami says thank you. Any more questions? I think then we will invite to close. But thank you, Maya. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Probably kind of early afternoon for you, and really amazing to share. I mean, also I'm so curious now to kind of look at also what are these kind of pattern archives and the tools. I think this is kind of really fascinating. And then this really kind of as you've indicated that. A lot of the people that you tattoo on are also female, so that kind of history and also trying to kind of understand that's really fascinating. And
yeah, it really is a female practice, and women tattooing women, and that's also an empowering factor in this post-colonial situation where we have learned to focus on the man, and all research is primarily on the man when you look at our culture. So it does have some kind of empowerment part of it, which is good for us.
Great. Thank you very much. Really great way to end the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
No.
We're not going to have a computer. Oh, wait. Should I start, or do you want to?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for today. I'm so grateful for this day. I'm grateful for sharing it with you. Thank you, all the speakers and all the makers. It has been really wonderful to get to experience this day. And I also want to thank you, Elias, for all the organizing and the hard work that you have done, and Karl-Oskar for, I mean, the technology has worked all through the day, which is due to the magic of Karl-Oskar. And also, of course, thank you, Havre, for hosting and the lovely hosting that you have done today and several other times during the biennial. And tomorrow is the last day of the biennial. It feels a little bit sad, of course, but I'm also sitting here being very grateful for this experience. And with that, also want to thank you, Maria Ragnestam and Konstfrämjandet in Norrbotten for this, for the hard work. But of course, primarily also to thank all of you that made it possible to do the biennial the way that we have done it. You know, for us to be able to do a biennial through listening and learning, it also means that there's people that has the great generosity of sharing, you know, their knowledge, their expertise, their time, and it has been really grateful. It has been really great to do this work because we have been met by such a great generosities, I would say, and of course all the participants, all of them that we have been able to collaborate within the learning room, the exhibition, the festival, but all others that has been hosting us all through the biennial. Has been really humbling to get to listen and learn through the biennial, and to do that with the last day tomorrow. Thank you. Is something that you want to add to that?
No, that's a really nice summary, Christina. And it's been a pleasure to work together.
Yes.
I have to add that. I use this stage as an opportunity to do that. But I do think to kind of return to one of our original principles where we were talking about this idea of custodianship. The biennial was not ours to own. It was not ours to impose onto this kind of region and the kind of all the people that are involved in it. But somehow, hopefully, we've left some sort of trace that can also be built upon. And I think it's really important. We've tried to do that in many cases in a structured way, like to actually try to leave things that can be kind of further developed and worked on. But also, I hope there are traces in terms of the relationships that we've made, but also the relationships that have been kind of engendered through the biennial and the kind of production of it. And part of that is also been to try to kind of make connections between people and organizations through these kind of last 2 years of working on it. So I think in that sense, I really hope that there is some sort of kind of trace, and that the next biennial somehow kind of picks up on some of these things. And I'm sure they will. Maria's already indicated that might be happening in certain forms. So we really look forward to the next biennial, and as Christina says, we still have 1 day, so it's not quite closure.
And we also have tonight, so I hope all of you will join us to, what is it called, Clarion Sense, the bar. It's just opposite the Konsthallen, so it's up on the roof there. So it would be amazing if we could meet up there at 8 o'clock. Great, thank you so much.